the end of the World War II consensus.
Who won the war? The Allies won the war. The good guys won the war. But that's not absolutely true. It's not completely true. The secret, the one that we don't say so much, reframing World War II, Kanye's last song is almost like an alarm bell saying, okay,
There's something wrong with the post-war consensus that we're telling ourselves, exploring what the other options are, and they're ending up with the inversion, which is just as bad.
Yeah, of course.
Well, no, sorry, I would say worse.
Once you set that up and you say Hitler is the devil, the communist imagery doesn't get the same treatment. There's a little door that's open. The push from the left has really been increasing since the 60s, like kind of increasing, right? You can see Soros as being kind of his open society. Now that push has faltered. So in that backing down, you have a temptation to reassert the other side. We're just gonna run in, we're just gonna go through the same story, but now it's gonna be the other side. It's just gonna be flipped.
We don't want that happening with Hitler.
The thing is that, I know this sounds like the weirdest thing to say in the world, but it is going to happen.
Before you hear from Jonathan Pageau, I ask if you want to support this show. All you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, we can have more phenomenal guests exploring the issues you want to hear about that the mainstream media won't touch. And if you head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk, not only will you have exclusive content and ad-free viewing, but you will hear an extended conversation between me and Jonathan takes some of your questions. But without further ado, Jonathan Pageau. Jonathan Pageau, it's a great pleasure to have you back on the show. 18 months since we last spoke, and we've been thinking about the same topic, the end of the World War II consensus. You've just had a video on your channel, The Symbolic World. Fantastic channel, by the way. I recommend to viewers to watch, and it's gone viral. On our channel, we had an interview with Rusty Reno, also known as R.R. Reno, the editor of First Things magazine and author of the book, The Return of the Strong Gods, exploring the same thing. And I think that there are other... maybe we should discuss why we're focusing on this period and who else seems to be focusing on this, because it's not just us who are focusing on this. It seems to be a pattern that's emerging. Either we start with that, or perhaps you want to lay out your thesis here.
No, we can talk about what's happening. You know, in some ways, it's related to the fact that the people that were there during World War II are basically dying off. And so the memory of World War II the quality of that memory is going to change. It's just normal that it changes. But of course, World War II in some ways is the founding myth of the modern world. It kind of grounds the geopolitical arena. It has ground also the alliances that have been there since the war, and it also gave a thrust, a kind of ideological thrust. The way that we understand the left versus the right is actually based on World War II and the way that we frame it. And so I really see that World War II is the founding myth of our modern world, and in that it has like I said, it has a thrust. It has certain taboos about it. It has certain sacred places that have to be commemorated and visited and all of that. And it also has a devil that has a function in the story, playing the role of the devil, which of course is Hitler. But in some ways, everybody could understand. There's no morality about it. Everybody can understand that a story like that can hold a world together for a certain amount of time. Like it can act as a framing device for a world for a certain amount of time, and at some point it'll run out, right? And a new story has to come and take its place. And it seems the reason why I've been thinking about this for decades, you know. And so the reason why I started talking about it now is that I started to see that shaking happening. And a lot of people are now speaking into this space, reframing World War II, talking about it through a different lens. And then there are more frightening images and more crazier images. Of course, the Kanye's last song, his HH song, is in some ways almost like an alarm bell saying, okay, this is shaking everybody. And it's such a paradoxical song. It's so contradictory, but nonetheless, the imagery is kind of just being thrust back into the culture. And so it's important that we think about it and we talk about it.
Okay, so I might try and colour in, although you can just other people who seem to be talking about this, and the emergence of this podcaster, and he calls himself, I think, an amateur historian. He doesn't say he's a professional historian. Darryl Cooper, who has said, amongst other things, that Churchill was the real villain of World War II, that one should take Mein Kampf with a pinch of salt. He said that on the Joe Rogan Experience, and he's appearing on major mainstream podcasts now. This seems to be like a really prominent version of this revision of that period. It's sort of everyone's recognizing that there was the turmoil we're going through globally today has its roots there. But I think that, I obviously think they've misdiagnosed, because I have a different. I happen to think Churchill was the least bit the villain of World War II. But is there any? And then there's Kanye, is the sort of artist who doesn't really understand what's going on, but is kind of maybe reflecting some of that. So is there any other aspects that you see this bubbling out?
No, I mean, I think it's bubbling up. In some ways, you could say that the push from the left now that has been going on for a few decades, that has been increasing. It's really been increasing since the 60s, like late 50s, early 60s, kind of increasing. Now it's the first time that we feel like that push has faltered somewhat, right? And so we have this weird moment where Trump gets elected, and we kind of feel like some of the talking points that have been ramping up are now ramping down. It doesn't mean that it's over, that the discussion is over, but at least the push has lost a little bit of momentum.
Sorry, no, you have to explain that to me. So the push from the left.
Yeah.
So when you say the push from the left, what
I mean
is,
so you could think about it that since, this goes into the bigger story. So I don't know if we can. Let's say that first, then we can go into the bigger story. And so there is in some ways a push against identity. It's a good way of thinking about it. Identity, if it's construed as an identity that can influence, so power, right? So this idea there's a relationship between identity and power. Okay, so that can be framed in different ways. It can be framed as racial, right? The white man is the best, and the white man has power and exercises his power over the world. It can be understood as empire, right? The British Empire rules everything, basically, and it can be framed in different ways. And then there's another version of that, which is like a kind of anti-identity movement, which can be framed also in different ways. It can be framed as communism, as revolution, right? As basically the lower people, proletariat, or however you think of it, basically like taking power away from those that have it. It can be understood in terms of racial terms, in terms of racial justice, and all these things. So if you could think about it that way. So there's a push that's kind of an anti-identity push that's been happening since the late 1950s up till now. And that has ramped up. And it's not about what's good or bad. Like I want to be careful not to frame it that way. Identity can be dangerous, and it can be great. And sometimes you need to deconstruct identity when it becomes too tyrannical. But that, if you push that too far, then it turns into a kind of chaos and a kind of madness. And a lot of the LGBTQ stuff kind of started moving into a type of madness that was unsustainable, right? Where you start to now question the basic characteristics of reality, right? The opposition between masculine and feminine is one of the most basic, structures of human behavior. And now you're starting to say, no, that doesn't mean anything. You have to deconstruct that. It's all free floating. It's all these free floating agents. Okay. Now that push has been just ramping up. And now finally there's this moment where it's kind of backing down somewhat. And so in that backing down, you have a temptation to reassert the other side, right? And that reassertion can take all kinds of different forms. But mythologically, you could say, story-wise, then it will appear in some guises as a kind of desire to reassert certain of the Nazi imagery. It's almost inevitable that it happens because the whole story is couched in that mythos, right? It's couched in what happened in World War II. Mm-hmm. Maybe we can unpack that, and that can help people understand.
I think we should, yeah.
So
Now, a quick interruption from our sponsor, Ground News. We specifically partnered with Ground News because their app and website help me and my team cut through media bias and get the full picture on any news story. Let's take a quick example. How the media is covering Trump's new travel ban. Left-leaning The Intercept ran the headline, Trump travel ban punishes victims of the US war machine. Now let's turn to Ground News to see how the rest of the media is covering this story. There are over 415 published on Trump's new travel ban, and we can access every single one through Ground News, complete with source context and a breakdown of key information. Meanwhile, right-leaning The Blaze ran the headline, Trump announces total ban on travel from 12 countries. Just focusing on the key information, which is a very different narrative from The Intercept. Seeing all sides, regardless of political lean, is essential for making informed decisions and spotting media bias. That's why Ground News' blind spot feed, which highlights stories underreported by either side, is such a powerful tool. I genuinely believe in what Ground News is doing, and I encourage you to check it out by scanning the QR code or visiting ground.news/Winston. If you subscribe through my link, you'll get 40% off unlimited access. Ground News is subscriber funded, and by supporting my sponsors, you are supporting this show. But back to the interview.
This is the way that I tend to think about it, right? Is that basically in World War II, you had these two authoritarian regimes, these two kind of monstrous regimes that caused massive amounts of death. You had the Nazis and the communists. You had Stalin and Hitler, and those two at the outset were allied together. And then they split, and we ended up beating the Nazis. But the secret, the one that we don't say so much, we say because we ask the question, who won the war, right? The Allies won the war. The good guys won the war. But that's not absolutely true. It's not completely true, right? We allied ourselves with a horrible demon in order to fight another horrible demon, right? But that's difficult to sustain as a story, right? It's easier if you want to found a world to say, it's pretty simple, right? The good guys won, the bad guys lost. That's the story. That's what we're going with. It's founded the modern world. It brought about a move towards the end of history, like all of that kind of frame. And so what happened is that although in the United States, there was a little moment where people resisted communism, right, in the early 50s, that went away very fast. And by the end of the 50s and the early 60s, there was already a kind of incursion of communist thinking into America.
Okay, so you're putting that on the fact that we didn't properly assimilate or fully understand what had happened.
Yeah, but the thing is that I'm not judging anyone. There's
no judgment in this. I'm just trying to understand.
There's no other way to do it, right? And so in order to found a world, you need to have a kind of clear myth that creates it. But most worlds have hidden sins in them. They have hidden dark sides to that. And those hidden sins, they get kind of pushed to the side in order to give thrust to a story. But at some point, those sins, they start to show themselves, and then they start to affect the world, right? And if you don't become conscious of them at some point, they can just eat you up, like they start to devour you. And so I think that that's the best way of understanding it is that there was a good reason to frame the world the way that we did in order to give rise to the modern world that we live in. That was a world of amazing prosperity that brought about great freedoms, that brought about great creativity, that did some wonderful things. But there was a kind of weird secret in that world, which is, and it's not it sounds very like I'm being mystifying. It's not mystifying. So you think about it like, once you set that up and you say Hitler is the devil, right? And he's a good candidate for the devil, right? But you say he's the devil of this world, and everything that's related to the Nazis and to fascism is completely forbidden, right? You have no access to it. You can't bring it up. You can't talk about it. You can't identify with it. None of that is possible, okay? But because of this weird secret sin in the beginning of the story, the communist imagery doesn't get the same treatment. There's a little door that's open. Mm-hmm. And then that door, right, through the flooding in of left-wing intellectuals into our university system, in our education system, that door starts to open and open and open. And so there's place for that discourse, but there's no place for the other one. And so what it does is means that history from that point, for a certain amount of time, is always leftward lurching, inevitably. Because, and what happens is that the things that are forbidden about the Nazis, they increase, right? So at first it's strict Nazi imagery, right? You can't bring that up, you can't show it, you can't identify with it. But then what happens is slowly everything that's related that can be stuck to it starts to be part of that story, right? So it's not just that people that, like, let's say, strictly identified with Nazism, that were in the party for the whole time and celebrated the chancellor and did all that. Those people, obviously, they're forbidden. But soon it's like, well, now Heidegger is forbidden because Heidegger was in the party for a little while, and even though he opposed it or didn't follow it after, oh no, you can't have Heidegger.
Mm-hmm.
And then later it's like, well, actually anything that is trying to show that a nation, European nation, is great, or you can't have that because that's Nazism. And then all the imagery in the US that's from the South, because that's racism, now it's not even about the Civil War. It's actually framed in World War II mythology. You can't have that. So Confederate flag, out. All that, out. Nationalism, out. Anything that celebrates European identity starts to get pushed out, okay? So it grows.
Now, is that, do you think, parallel to the further away in time you are from an event, the less complex it, or the sort of simpler and low definition becomes as it's in the distance, and so it becomes a kind of increasingly a goody baddie dichotomy. And when you're in the middle of it, it's incredibly complex, and you're aware of how complex it is because you're trying to deal with. You want to make the right decisions, and so it's foolish to do a goody baddie sort of dichotomy. But the further in time it is, the further away from the World War II we fall prey to that.
I think there's part of that, but I think another aspect of it is something like you plant a seed, right? And you plant a certain seed and it has a certain shape, and at first the consequences of that seed look very small, but then as time goes, the fruits of that start to show themselves, and the thrust of the narrative has a direction, and it's hard to stop it once it's started, right? And so you have this growing suspicion towards anything that is related to identity. And then that finds its reflection in all kinds of different discourse. It's related to ethnic questions, to race, like more specifically, then to gender, then to sexuality, then all of a sudden having a family is fascist, then, et cetera. Like it just keeps going. Anything that is in some ways normal identity, in the sense of an identity that has a kind of stance, gets tossed out, right?
If anyone listening thinks that that's you saying having a family is fascist is a joke, look at what the BLM organization were writing.
Yeah.
2020, they were explicitly against the nuclear family.
Yeah.
So that is very much part of that narrative.
And so it's important to see that. And then, like I said, the rest, on the other side, the space for the anti-identity position starts to grow and starts to take on multiple shapes. A good example, and then so now it's so bad that during the COVID demonstrations in Canada is a really great example of that, right? So you have a demonstration, and then what seems to most people at this point is that they send a Fed in to the demonstration with a Nazi flag, and everybody in the demonstration is angry and is like telling this guy to leave, and he's wearing a mask and he's not showing himself. They're telling him to leave. So finally, after, I don't know how long he was there, I don't know, 15 minutes, whatever, he leaves. But that's it for that demonstration.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a Nazi demonstration forever in the media landscape.
Yes.
But in the counter demonstration, there were communist flags all over. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal, even though the communists obviously slaughtered insane amounts of people, and the prisons in Romania or in Russia, or the Gulag in Russia, was just decades of torture and slaughter and murder.
And it was explicit in the Marxist literature. Marx himself wrote about this. I just color that in with more examples. So Posey Parker, who's a women's rights activist here in Britain, did a tour of Australia, and there were some Nazis or black-clad sort of protesters style things around. And that even though she distanced herself from them, said she had nothing to do with them, the whole thing got tarred that way. But also on the left, I remember seeing Jeremy Corbyn, former leader of the Labour Party, when he was running in both 2017 and 2019 to the general election to be Prime Minister, he would protest, and there would be not only Hezbollah flags behind him, but also hammer and sickle. And, in reverse, if anyone on the political right had any sort of flag with any Nazi imagery, any swastika like that, game over.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, he would have come out and be like, I have nothing to do with that. With Corbyn, there's just a double standard on the left. And I totally agree, even though, numbers wise, there's an argument that communism killed a hell of a lot more than fascism.
Yeah. After the trucker protest, when we had Canada Day, like our celebration, national holiday, Trudeau forbade the use of the Canadian flag in our national holiday.
What?
Because nationalism, fascism, right? And so the reason why I talk about this is that, we've reached this breaking point where at some point this is it's untenable. It's untenable in all kinds of ways. This narrative cannot continue forever, and at the same time, for example, how can I say this? Like, even though Hitler is a very evil person and did very evil things, he cannot be the devil forever. That is not possible. He can't play that role forever in our story. He can't, because not only is Hitler the devil, he's worse than the devil. Like, if I call you a devil, you might get annoyed, but if I call you Hitler, you might punch me. Like, that's how bad it is to actually use that term. It's the worst thing you can call anyone. So if you want to go against Trump, you don't call him the devil. You call him Hitler. That's how you characterize someone as the most evil thing that humanity has ever imagined. Now, the problem is that Hitler is not that. The devil is much worse than Hitler. And even saying that, it's funny because in my video, I said that. And some people in the comments said, when you said that, I felt uneasy, as if I'm not allowed to think that.
Yeah, I feel uneasy listening. It's weird,
right?
then. Yeah.
It's weird, but it's like, that's actually true, right? The devil is worse than Hitler. The devil is the incarnation of everything that's evil in the world. Hitler is a very particular manifestation of that evil in a very particular place. And so there's no way that he can play that role forever. And I think that, because of the fact that in some ways the memory of World War II is changing because people are dying, now everything is shaking. And so you can understand that there are some people that are in some way saying, we have to be able to recapture the other side. We have to take it back somehow. Because the problem is, you can't, let's say if you're right-leaning, and you know that I can destroy you by showing that a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend of yours is hard right, and I can destroy your career just by that it doesn't matter how many steps. You could find as many steps as you want. If I can find a connection between you and some kind of fascism, I could destroy your life.
Yeah.
And so that's untenable. And so what you're seeing, and it's very uneasy, and it's hard to, and it's almost intuitive. I don't know how many people are doing it on purpose, but you can see people are saying, we have to reclaim some of this imagery in order to free ourselves from that problem. So,
Yeah, so
you saw Bannon. Did you see Bannon do a very weak Roman salute? It's almost like he ran out of juice trying to do it. Like, he was going to do it, and then he kind of ran out of energy, because obviously Bannon's not a Nazi, he's not a fascist. But I think there are some people that are saying we need to reclaim some of this stuff somehow, or else the conversation is not possible, right? But I'm not.
I want to unpack what you mean by reclaiming it, because another angle might be to say that we didn't actually properly deal with how evil communism is. People are ignorant. I've met people who'd never heard of Mao, who's responsible for killing more individuals than any human has ever lived. It's even crazy that we think of Hitler as evil as he is, considering how evil Mao was.
Yeah.
And we've forgotten that. So it's interesting that you want to sort of you're talking about recapturing. We'll go to.
I'm not saying that's what I want to do. I'm saying that that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing some of that happening, where people are saying, when I was young, I remember I was a teenager, I watched this interview with a French intellectual, and it was these two French intellectuals discussing, and one of them was more conservative, and he had chosen an image of a German knight as like the symbol for his organization. It was like a German knight sitting on a horse. So what did the left-wing guy say? He said, that there is some Nazi somewhere in the history of Nazism that used an image that, if it is not exactly that one, kind of looks like that one. So what does that mean? It means you're a Nazi, right? And so that's untenable. Like, how do we deal with this? So how do we find a way out of that untenable position? And it's not just, and the reason why I say that too is because it's not as simple as just saying we have to reclaim this, we have to reclaim this. What happens is that imagery becomes like a dark secret, right? So it's pushed down into the underbelly of the world, and it becomes this weird dark secret. And it's because it's completely excluded. It's almost like the shadow of the West, right? In Jungian terms, it gets completely excluded. And then not everyone, many people who then feel excluded, who are resentful because they don't have a place in the world, at some point, they go on a little, Joseph Campbell adventure into the underworld to try to see what treasures are there that they could find that could help them find some thing they can grab onto in their resentment. And so that story isn't just a story. It's embodied in people. It's embodied in people that have no place in the world and that are saying, and that are in some ways becoming, you could say, satanic, for use of a better word, satanic for the story. They're saying something, they're like, I call them World War II metalheads, or like Ozzy Osbourne, like a kind of Ozzy Osbourne aesthetic, but for World War II. They're saying, hey, maybe the upside down is the right story, right? Maybe the devil actually is the hero in this story.
So in simple terms, it's because there's something wrong with the post-war consensus that we're telling ourselves, the narrative we're telling ourselves. And they recognize there's something wrong with that narrative, so they're exploring what the other options are, and they're ending up with the inversion, which is just as bad.
Yeah, of course.
Well, no, sorry. The inversion is, I would say, worse than.
Well, it ends up, because one of the things that's the craziest, and I'm sorry, when I laugh, it doesn't mean I think I'm funny. I always laugh in the worst spot. I laugh in front of tragedy. Sadly, it's a characteristic. I've actually laughed when someone pointed a gun at me in my life, and so it's like, it's not that how can I say this? Like, it's not that I find it funny. It's that I find it uncomfortable. But sorry, just to get that out of the way, because people like, he takes it very lightly. I don't take this very lightly at all, because one of the things that happens is that the version of Hitler that we have, it's a caricature of Hitler, right? Hitler was obviously evil and horrible, but the devil version of him, like the satanic story version of him, is far worse than the actual Hitler, right? It's like take everything evil in the world and just put it into one person, and that's Hitler. And so what happens in the people that go into that dark space and then look for that dark treasure, they're not the Nazis. They're the movie version of the Nazis, right? They like the propaganda version of Hitler, right? It's kind of like, even if they're Holocaust deniers, they'll say, if the Holocaust didn't happen, well, I'll do it now, right? It's worse than even like the people that are kind of going into that space and are willing to embody that satanic force. Not all of them, but some of them will go all the way through, and like I said, will become, for all intents and purposes, like Satanists to the story, And so that's one of the problems, is that's why I say I think there's there's things that are shaking and things that are kind of twisting in the wind, that are trying to find a way to reintegrate some of this imagery in a manner that won't unleash the horde of demons that are there. So I don't know if that's possible. Maybe it's not possible. I don't know.
So there's two things then. There's imagery, and there's the actual narrative and ideas, right? Because
these are related together, right? So in some ways, and this is not, I know this is weird for people to think this way. I'm not arguing about what happened in World War II. Like, it's not about what the facts are. Those facts obviously are important, but it's mostly about what is the story that has been received that is motivating people to act and to think. That's the thing that I'm talking about. And that's a mythological story, right? It's a identity story. It tells us who we are, who we aren't, what we're allowed, what we're not allowed, what are the taboos of our world are based on that mythology. And so that's what I'm talking about, and so they're like, and the problem too is that story, like this story, will run out. there's no way that it can maintain forever. Like, you can't have the Nazis be the bad guys for 1,000 years. That's not possible.
And when you mean by that is that the story, no story can last.
No, I mean, except for
hypothetically it can, because we've got stories that have lasted for thousands of years.
Yeah,
and bad guys that have existed in the imagination for thousands of years.
So
why not?
There are religious stories that have that structure that can last for a very, very long time, but those are really the only ones. I mean, Alexander the Great was a horrible man. Alexander the Great slaughtered entire cities just because they didn't want to completely, they didn't surrender immediately, and just salted the earth and killed everyone, all the men, all the women, all the children. But
Yeah.
we remember him with a more subtlety, right? We kind of see the bad things that he's done, and we see, and then we see the other things that he's done, and we're like, we kind of get it. And you said, I think we had a conversation earlier before. It's like, that's already that's how we see Napoleon. Like, we can see Napoleon, who is a horrible monster, but we can see that, okay, so he did this, he did that. We kind of analyze.
Well, the reversion has happened with Napoleon, but he's gone from someone who killed, I think, well over 1 million across Europe, and in Britain was the enemy, was the personification, I guess, of the devil. And now it's perfectly okay to admire Napoleon, even for the British. Even he represented our adversaries across the Channel. It's okay to be, he set up all the schools across. He did this, that, and the other to advance, human flourishing or whatever. But he's a hero in a weird way. I actually have a bust of Napoleon at home.
Really?
Yeah. So it's possible to see, but we don't want that happening with Hitler.
The thing is that, I know this sounds like the weirdest thing to say in the world, but it is going to happen. Like, it's going to happen. Maybe it'll happen over 500 years. Maybe it'll take
that Hitler will become a sort of heroic figure.
He won't necessarily be. I don't know if he'll be a heroic figure, but he will be a more subtle figure. Like, he'll just have a more subtle place in the history. He won't just be the incarnation of all that is evil in humanity, even though he did obviously horrendous, horrible things. And that's just going to happen. I know it sounds weird. People don't. It's going to happen because of time. It's going to happen because the stakes are going to go away, and the things that held the world together are going to start to dissolve, and another story is going to appear, and another devil is going to come, and that devil will replace that one. And so it's just inevitable that it happens. The question is, you can say that when the end of World War II founded the modern world as a kind of mythological substructure, it had an expiration date. We don't know what the expiration date is, but in some ways it just had it. And I know it's weird to say, because obviously I don't like Hitler, obviously, but I know that that's just how history goes.
Well, there's other examples. We've already touched on the left, but it's worth going there. So Stalin, responsible for many tens of millions killed in his own country, is still considered amongst Russians the greatest Russian ever lived. There's still statues of him. Lenin is still wildly popular. I've had several experiences where Lenin is their hero, responsible also for many millions of deaths directly. And Marx, even though I don't know if he's directly responsible for any deaths, his literature is genocidal at the level of the class, and he splits people up into class, and in that respect, it's a different version of Hitlerism in that instead of by racial identitarian lines, it's by class lines. Those guys had never went through real. They did in certain places. Yeah. If you are in Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, the Visegrad nations, they have really understood both the devils. Yeah. And so they're in perhaps they're in they have a different narrative, and they've assimilated all this information differently.
Yeah. I remember seeing, when I heard the first time I saw Putin try to reintegrate Stalin, and I thought, that's crazy. What is he doing? That is nuts. And it's only with some reflection that I kind of realized, well, he's doing it because he wants to reaffirm continuity. Right? He doesn't want to understand his identity as completely discontinuous from the things that came before him. And like I said, what I'm seeing is that is what's shaking. That's a good way of understanding what's going on. Like, that is what's shaking in the culture. And that is what's motivating people to say the things they're saying. And I don't know how conscious it is, and it doesn't really matter. But it seems to be to me, it seems like that's what's going on.
What do you think? Maybe we could be more specific about what's specifically inspiring that. It's clear. Is it because we got something wrong about the narrative, and we're hitting that fault line, and so it's manifesting in a very peculiar way? I'll give you an example of that. So I mentioned Rusty Reno at the beginning, and something I've gleaned from his writing is he blames a lot of this on Karl Popper, who in his book The Open Society and Its Enemies, published in 1944, and Popper considered it to be his war effort, he is trying to deal with the Holocaust. It must never happen again, of course. There's a noble goal there. And he creates this dichotomy, the open societies, and he puts freedom, liberalism, democracy. And then in the closed societies, not only does he put in fascism, but and tyranny. He puts in nationalism.
Yeah.
He puts in religion. And Reno even argues that he puts in truth in that side. But he's explicit about nationalism. I mean, I've read the Popper, and he's explicit about nationalism and religion, at least. And so you have emerging this false dichotomy. And so it's easy for me to conceive of how we're hitting that wall, that actually there is a version of nationalism that is good. There's a version that's bad.
Yeah.
And I would also say with religion as well, these things are metaphysical, but they're the most real thing. Yeah. So in a sense, I can understand in his framing of this problem why it is that this is emerging now. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. So there are many things that are bringing about the moment, and it's kind of conjunction of things. One is, I do believe that in some ways it's the spike of the open society, let's say, frame pushed to the extreme, where you end up with the shadow, or like the vision of globalism, right? You could see Soros as being kind of his open society. Soros
was a student of Popper at LSE in London, and named his organization the Open Society.
And so basically, like the downstream from that, you have all of these problems that are happening, right? And those problems, they manifest themselves in real issues that, like, the other side can see, which is demographic collapse, which is meaninglessness, nihilism, all of these things. Because one of the things that the anti-identity side did was, in some ways, attacked anything that gave you a sense of direction and purpose and meaningfulness in life, right? Because we identify with our families, we identify with our nation, we identify with certain projects, and even those at some point become kind of evil. It's like, even capitalism becomes evil because it's like this tyrannical kind of imposition of will on the world. And so that is definitely part of what's happening, and then, the other part of what's happening is that those are leading to wars, right? So we have these wars that are on our doorstep, right? We have the Ukraine-Russia war, we have the war in Israel, and those are glimmering with the residues of the World War II story, right? In different ways. And people are kind of seeing that, and they're like, well, I don't know if I want this. I don't know if we want this. I don't know if this is how further we can go down this direction.
What do you think about the World War II story is coming out in those two conflicts?
Well, so, I mean, what happened in World War II, and it's very odd, is in some ways there's this weird flip, and this is what the hard right people say, and you probably heard this, is they say nationalism bad, religion bad, identity bad, race bad, except one, right?
That's what the hard right say.
That's what the hard right say. They say that's the problem with our situation now, because nation is bad except for Israel, right? Race is bad except for the Jewish race, and religion is bad except for that religion. That's how they see it.
I haven't. Sorry, I'm being slow.
You never heard that? People say that. That's their perception. Is that in some ways what happened is there's like a flip that happened. That in some ways the Jews were the ones that were the most persecuted, obviously, in World War II, the ones that were decimated, that were attacked. So because of that, it brought about a nation, right, to be able to gather all these people into a place where they could exist as a nation. But then they're existing as a nation that's an ethno-state for all intents and purposes, and that has a unified vision and a unified religion.
So do you mean to say nation good except Israel, religion
No.
good except
What I mean is that
Jews.
in the post-World War narrative, it wasn't apparent at the outset, but as the story continued, what happened is all the Western nations became imaged as fascism, right? Except for the one nation that, because of the scandal of World War II, was allowed to have an ethno-state, right, where the Jews are allowed the right to return and are allowed, and they have their own religion and they have a kind of thrust, right? And then that's what's shaking right now, is that now some people are saying, oh, until not that long ago, like until a few decades ago, that was kind of just there. And then at some point, the hard left kind of weirdly flipping and saying, wait a minute, they're doing the same thing as those people
Yeah,
that
that
brought
probably
about
happened around
World
the
War II.
1967 war, but it does seem like that's what I'm
So
feeling.
that's what I mean. It's like the story is in that. That's why it's happening there. Everything is kind of happening there. There's a story that's happening there.
So, but that's the hard left position, not the hard right position.
And those two are obviously, you've noticed that those two are coming together in a disturbing way, right? That at some point, you could say the animosity, on the one hand saying, on the one hand from the hard right, people saying there's something weird that happened because now we're not allowed a nation, but they're allowed a nation.
Oh, I see.
Right? Why is it that the British...
So the hard right aren't saying that nationalism is bad.
No, they're just don't like that.
Why is it that nationalism is bad for us, but it's not bad for the Jews?
Right. That's the weird thing that happened.
So there's a resentfulness towards the consensus.
It's like what happened? Like, why is it that this is the way it is? Like, and they see some kind of whatever, like they see, it really is a narrative. It's really a narrative thing. In some ways, it was inevitable that it happened that way because of the Holocaust, like because the horrors of what the Jewish people went through, it's like almost like a flip happened, and that wasn't totally apparent at the outset, but it's that story started to grow, and now we're seeing the consequences of it. So now Israel is like, that's the place where it's all happening. So on the one hand, you have, I didn't think we were going to talk about this. This is harder to talk about because it's very, obviously it's very sensitive. But on the one hand, you have people that are more hard on the right, that are angry that they can't have their race and their nation and their religion, but Israel can. And then you have on the left, with their identity, they're seeing that Israel has a race, a nation, and a religion, and now they're identifying that with what happened in World War II, and they're saying you're fascist
in a Popperian way.
Yeah. And so it's like this weird thing where it's all crunching into that space. And that's why it's one of the reasons why there's so much attention to that place. It's not surprising. It is the center of the world, after all. It's been the center of the world now for a few thousand years. So it's even narratively, it's not surprising that all of this, the story is kind of playing out in that space. And it is also playing out in the World War II. The World War II space too, and that's where it's playing out too, but in a reversal. It's upside down, right? So now who are the fascists? The Russians are the fascists. And who are the allies? The Germans are the allies. But it's the same story. It's the same story, we just flip it upside down, and it's like, that's why I'm talking about this, is because if we don't reintegrate some of this aspect of this story in a bigger way, we're just going to go through the same story and upside down. We're going to have a war between Germany and Russia, but now it's going to be the other side. It's just going to be flipped.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is it not as simple as these things are so unbelievably complex that people need an easy way to understand what's going on?
Yeah, but that's how we are. Humans are like that, right? And narrative in its very function is simplified in order to be able to be held, right, in your mind, and then for it to be able to give you a thrust of action. And so that's why myths look the way they do. That's why stories look the way they do. We can't avoid that. Like we can't get out of that. And so, like I've said, I don't blame anyone for anything that's brought us now. It's the thrust of a story.
It just is what it is.
It is. This is where we are. But we have to be able to see that's where we are, so that who, like, I don't know how to do it. I guess that's why I've never talked about this
But
until
so-
now. I don't know how to fix it. Like, I don't know how to reintegrate it. I can just see that that's what's going on. I can see the story play. I can see the narrative playing out. I can see the characters. I can see what's going on, and I'm not sure how to fix it.
I mean, is part of it is in the identification, and
What do you mean?
if we look what happened and then say, okay, we explain why I think Popper is wrong in his dichotomy, and we explain why communism is evil and Marxism is evil.
Explanations don't, sadly. I wish we were all like that, but explanation doesn't motivate action.
So what does?
Action motivates action. Like, things that happen in the world are what motivate action, and that's why, in some ways, I think that that's one of the reasons why Donald Trump has an effect, because he's not really arguing with anyone. He's not explaining things. He's basically like doing things, and those things, they have repercussions in the world. And so that's why I'm saying it's like, if you explain what's going on to people, I don't know how it's going to help. There has to be something that is more on the level of mythology and imagery, that kind of has to happen, so that what my hope would be, and I don't know, like I said, I don't know how to do it. My hope would be that there are some images from World War II that could be freed, you could say, of their associations, so that they lose their teeth. Because this is the problem, is that we put the fangs on World War II imagery are so sharp to make them the bad guy. But now they can also be a weapon that's going to come back like a monster and eat you,
I'm still a bit confused by that, because maybe this is because you're talking with this sort of symbolic world attitude, and so this might need to translate it to me, and I do love that about your analysis of symbolism, and perhaps that's the realm you're talking about, because I don't, for example, need. I don't need the swastika to be, or an SS symbol to be reintegrated. For me, Kanye is using that symbol.
Yeah, the swastika is a great example. Actually, the swastika is probably one of the best examples to understand the problem we're in, because the swastika is one of the most powerful images that humans have come up with. It's actually it's one of the oldest. It's a universal image. It's found in every single culture, from East Asia to South America to Europe. You go to churches, you visit Calvin's church in Switzerland, and there are swastikas in the decorations. You go to Greece, you find swastikas in their decoration. The swastika is one of the most universal, ancient, powerful images, right? And so now the Nazis use that image. So now it's infected, right? It's infected by their horrible ideology. But forever? Like forever, that symbol that is found in every single culture, that when I went to the British Museum yesterday and I was looking at Anglo-Saxon art, I was like, well, there's a swastika there, there's a swastika there. That image now forever is trapped in this story. That's not possible.
Why is that not possible?
Because it's bigger than the Nazis. It's something like this, like I told you, it's like the devil is more evil than Hitler, right? And the swastika is bigger than the Nazis. And so the swastika at some point has to break out of that trap. Like, it's gonna just happen, because it's just everywhere. So now, and you see like naive people, obviously, they see some like Buddhist swastika, and they're like, oh, they're Nazis. Like, that was there 1,000 years ago. Like, they're not Nazis. And so that's what I mean, is that will break out at some point. Now, how is it going to break out? Because it's a very powerful image. It's something that is, it's a cosmic image. It's very, very powerful. It's as if someone tried to trap the cross, right? And someone said, oh, the Crusaders used the cross, and that's a horrible thing they did. And so now no one can use the cross anymore because it's infected. It's like, well, that's not going to happen. At some point, you can't trap it. You can't make it in that story. The Nazis can't do it, and the people that hate the Nazis can't do it. At some point, it's going to break out. Now, the question is, how is it going to break out? Is it going to break out in a way that's going to, like I said, is going to be like a door for all the demons to come out? Or can we reintegrate it in a way that would just slowly reintegrate it back into our culture, like we're reintegrating like the shadow of, in Jungian terms, like we're just basically trying to kind of reintegrate this slowly so that it doesn't completely explode us, you know?
So if you took a 10,000-year view and you thought about it in those terms, fast forward, looking back, yeah, I can imagine these sort of symbolisms could fade away. But we're at an 80-year view, and it just doesn't it seem a bit soon to have to do that?
It might be. The only reason why I'm talking about this is because I can see it shaking, and that's why I'm.
Because it's happening.
It's already happening.
It's happening.
And I think that Kanye's song is an example of that, where, you know, he in his paradox, like he's such a contradictory person. Like in his own mind, he seems like he's not. He has these contradictions in his mind, and so, you know, he is taking like KKK imagery as a black man and is like reintegrating it into his own aesthetic. He's taking Nazi imagery and he's kind of reintegrated in a way that is completely paradoxical. People, it's weird when the song came out and everybody was saying it's a Nazi song. I'm like, have you listened to the song? That's not a Nazi song. Like in the first verse, he talks about that he's a cuck and that he likes to watch people, you know, bang his wife. And then he says the Hitler. It's like, no, that's not Nazism. I don't know what it is. Whatever it is, it's not Nazism, but it's like a weird, paradoxical, contradictory thing that is just bubbling up, you know, through his. I always see him as a kind of a tuning fork, right? He just starts to vibrate in the shape of the culture, you could say, you know. And I knew, like, when Kanye converted to Christianity, quote unquote, now at this point, you know, I was like, oh, wow, I guess we're going to see a bunch of Christians now. And that's what happened, right? All of a sudden, you had this wave of Christian people, like, coming into the church. And then when he started playing with, like, Nazi imagery, I was like, oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. Yeah, come on, man. Come on, man. But in some ways, that's what's, it's like, it's just, like I said, it's just kind of happening, you know?
So when you talk about the symbol of the crucifix, obviously it's in a way, it's the most genius symbol there is. I can understand what it's loaded with, not just Christian symbolism, but it's the shape of a man, it's the shape of suffering. It is everything that happened in that cross is symbolized by the crucifix. But and I don't understand. I know a little bit about the swastika. It's a rotation, but I'm not sure. I don't understand what it. So pre-Nazi, I don't know what that symbol means and why it's been found across so many different cultures and across time. What about it resonates with the human soul, the human imagination?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, it is a cross. Like the symbol of the cross, of just the plus sign, is extremely satisfying. It connects to the human being at a very, very deep level, because it's kind of experienced as the relationship between verticality and horizontality, right? So just in terms of your experience, the difference between the sky and the ground, you know, these are very primordial experiences. And so it's an abstracted version of that, and it has a center. That's really important. The imagery of the center in human culture, you know, it becomes, in some ways, it's the reference point, right? So you have something that's a reference point, and then you have extensions of that reference point. You have the four directions. You have, however you want to think about it. You can think about yourself. You're standing here. You're the reference point. And then you have in front of you, behind you, left, right. Those are our directionalities, right? So the world is separated into four quadrants like that. But then with the swastika, what it has that's so powerful is that because the cross changes directions, and it goes up and then it flips, what it suggests is motion. Right, so it's basically, you have an image that contains in itself both centrality, right? So the reference point, the extension of that reference point, and the way in which it changes. So that's why it's such a cosmic image, because it actually is universal. It has everything in it, right? It has, like I said, it has the center, it has the influence of the center, and then it has the way the center changes. And that's what makes it, I mean, it's obviously, I'm trying to justify something that I'm trying to understand why that symbol is so important, but I'm not exhausting why it's so important, because it just is. It's just everywhere. And it's just, it's probably connected very deeply to even the way we perceive. There are certain shapes that resonate with us. Like another shape that's like that is something like a vertical with a wave around it. So you have a vertical image and you have a wave on it. And it's like, so that's like the pole and the snake. It's represented in different ways, and that's everywhere, right? So again, you find it in South America, you find it in Christianity, you find it in every culture. You have this image that kind of
and so the in medicine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that these are just very, very deep images that appeal to very, very deep mechanisms of human perception, and the swastika is definitely one of those.
Okay.
So it's attractive, right? Like if you look at the image in itself,
it's not been attractive to me.
But I mean, just visually,
yeah, right?
Like I'm not saying that it's attractive because it's a Nazi thing, but when you look at it and you see it, it's a satisfying image,
right?
I mean, I know it's hard, especially if you're not like visually inclined. It's maybe hard to experience that because you're like, well, this is a horrible, symbol of evil. But for example, like in terms of aesthetics, the swastika is far more powerful than the hammer and sickle because it's far more universal. Right, the hammer and sickle, they were able to capture something powerful, but the swastika, they basically took they were smart. They took the oldest image in the world and they tried to co-opt it for their evil purposes.
Yeah, and what is the symbol of them reversing the symbol, the act? Because they put it in reverse.
No,
right?
they didn't. They didn't put it in reverse. They put it on its side. They made it instead of a cross, they made it into an X. Right, so they twisted it. There are probably versions of that existed before the Nazis did it. Usually, we see a swastika as a cross with it, but I mean, their particular version is that it's more an emphasis on rotation, But the thing is that it's perfectly coherent to what they were doing, because you could say that the image of a swastika is an image of an axis in motion, right? It's like the center of a wheel and a wheel that's turning around it. And that's what they were. They were overemphasis on identity, right? They were a kind of an overemphasis on authority, an overemphasis on centrality, right? That's their sin, right? Their sin is the sin of identity. It's like, it's pride, right? Pride in the sense of, I think my race is the greatest and I'm willing to do anything in order to assert that. I think that my history is the greatest and I'm willing to assert anything, do anything to assert that. It's like, that's the sin, that's their sin, and it's very mythologically, it makes sense because it's the opposite to the globalist sin, right? To the international sin that the communists were making, which is that everything is the same, everything is equal, there's no hierarchy, there's no authority, we're all, obviously, that was a lie because they couldn't do it, but that was at least the narrative that they told themselves. We're gonna just level everything, make everything flat, right? And so you have this even in the way we think about it, like the difference between an axis and allies. One emphasizes multiplicity, allies, and one emphasizes unity, axis, right? And so it's just mythologically inscribed in the entire story, everywhere in the story, this relationship between, you could say, identity and one and many, right? The relationship between the one and the many is inscribed in like the whole story. But at a normal level, you need a balance of both of those, right? You need to actually have you
need unity and diversity.
Exactly. Like, so you need the king and the jester. You need a sense of authority and tradition and connection to the past, but you also need to be able to adapt it to diversity and to welcome the stranger and to do all of these things that societies have always done in the past. But now what we've done is we've radicalized those two elements and we've created this insane, right-left dichotomy, that becomes untenable. I mean, think of the difference between like building a wall on the border and open borders. Like those two extremes are ridiculous. Both of those are ridiculous. And I understand why we're there at this moment where we're dealing with that.
Why are they ridiculous?
Why it's ridiculous to think that you can put a wall on a border?
Yeah.
But you can't. You can't stop permeability, right? All identities have to have some permeability. And so obviously you can build walls like they're doing, but you could never build, and I don't think they really do it, but like I'm talking like mythologically, like this image of basically like cutting yourself off, like making a wall around and trying to prevent, things from the outside to come without your consent. It's not possible. That's against human nature. Like, that's just not how things work. And so, but then it's also ridiculous to just say anyone could just come here and claim citizenship and say that they're part of us, even though they're just random people coming who we don't know their intentions. And so those two stories are kind of butting up against each other, or they're kind of fighting in a ridiculous way. But in normal societies, you had a center, and then you had different layers of difference as you moved away from that center, and then you had buffers of hybridity, on the edges, and that was just a normal thing, right? It's like you have the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire, and you have a kind of no man's land in between that's kind of vague, where people mix and exchange and trade goods, but then you still have Rome, which is the center, and that has a kind of authority and power. That's a normal way of thinking of the world. But our modernity has brought about these extremes that can't hold.
One of the ways that Rusty Reno, R.R. Reno, is framing this, and the title of his book is Strong Gods, and he sees these different things that we've been describing, whether it's nationalism, religion, these as objects of our passion. And another way of articulating it might be those metaphysical things that inspire our action.
Yeah.
And I think it's just an interesting way to approach it. I'm kind of interested in the Pageau opinion on that, because he is delving into the metaphysical in the way that you often do with your writing.
No, I think that that's a good way of understanding it. It's a good way of understanding that we need vectors of centrality. Like, we need things that unify us, and those are actually motivators, right? So, like, it's simple. Like, even in a normal setting, if I'm doing anything, I need to focus my action. Grab the cup. There's a little God. Like, it's weird to say it that way, but I'm celebrating an action, and it's motivating me towards doing something. So that's just how everything works at the lowest level. Now, things get more complicated when you try to unify groups of people together, so that they actually exist as a society and not just as a bunch of random individuals that don't interact with each other. You need these vectors of unity, and those vectors of unity means you need something in common. And that commonality, it can be obviously tribal. It's like we have the same ancestor, and I know all these people because they're my cousins and little cousins and everything. And so that level of communality can give you a sense that we're the same, right? We understand each other as being the same. You can also have religion obviously doing that, because then it's higher than the tribal. And you can have empires that do that, and you can have nations that do that try to basically bring people to think that they are one instead of being different, right? And so these are things
you can also have an enemy. A common enemy will also bring you together, which brings us back to World War II. Is that our common enemy?
That's exactly right. So for sure, the common enemy is a way to signal our unity. So a good example is in the Trojan War is a good example. So it's like the Greeks didn't exist, it seems, before the Trojan War, and that's why they call themselves Hellenes, because their origin, they came together in order to fight the Trojans and get this woman back, and it became a vector of their unity. And so you're right that a common enemy will also do that. A thing that's interesting to talk about right now is that there is, and if this has existed in the past, it's hard. I don't know when, but we have this weird also upside down gods that manifested themselves since World War II. Like, we have this idea of diversity as trying to make diversity a motivator.
Yes.
That's a very odd thing.
Reno will call them weak gods.
Yeah, but that's a very weird thing, right? Because you can't, it's like you're saying we're using difference to bring us together. That doesn't, it's a contradiction, right? Yes. And so it's a very odd thing that happened in our history, where all of a sudden we wanted to make difference a vector of unity, which is, it's a carnival move. It's like it's something that it really is in some. Carnival is the best way of thinking about it. It's like clown. It's like clown world. That's what people talked about. Clown world. It's not tenable, but it's what it does, and that's what's. I think maybe Reno has noticed that too. Is that it's a little frightening because as you move towards that diversity and you kind of celebrate diversity, you're calling secretly the strong gods, I guess you could call them. You're invoking them without maybe even knowing you're invoking them. Just like at the end of the carnival, order is restored, right? That's how the ancient carnivals used to end, with the killing of the carnival king.
So, sorry, implicit being to what you're saying is by stoking the weak god of diversity, you're actually calling
secretly
the strong god of unity.
Oh, yeah. Inevitably, because diversity
it's the opposite.
Yeah, diversity is not possible. People aren't doing it consciously, right? Just like people don't realize that when they're celebrating the carnival and they're dressed up and they're juggling and they're doing all the silly things that people do during a carnival, they don't realize that they're also, calling for order to return. Think about like little kids, right? So you have little kids and they realize that, mom and dad are distracted. So they start to poke at each other and then to start to cause chaos and turn things upside down and start to fight and start to do that. And what's going to happen? At some point, dad's going to come back. He's going to put a foot down and he's going to be more authoritarian than he was before the whole thing started. And so that's the danger. And so we saw that like, actually, that's why it's scary now. It's scary because there was some aspect of that at the beginning of the century. You see that, like, you can understand the shift between Weimar and the Reich as something like that, where we had this kind of decadent, very permissive, very kind of weird culture, and that there was something in that was in some ways calling for a clampdown.
And people will say that about the Roman Empire as well at various points. But it doesn't inevitably go the other way necessarily.
Well, the hope is that you have someone who can reintegrate things in the right way. And so you could, some people would disagree with me, obviously, but you could think that, for example, Augustus is a figure that tried to do that in some ways he became extremely, extremely powerful, right? He became the emperor, he became the god emperor, and then he ceded his official authority in a way to try to diffuse the dangers of this hyper centrality, right? So people say it was just a ploy, it was just a joke. But, I think that these types of moves are interesting. I think like a good example is, of course, George Washington's a good example too, where, the chaos of the revolution usually leads to tyranny. That's what happened in France. That's what happened in Russia. But in the U.S., somehow it didn't happen because George Washington, who could have been made the God King, there's an image of his apotheosis in Washington, D.C., for goodness sake. He's going up into heaven and becoming a god in their Capitol building. So it's like that could have happened, but he sacrificed himself and he divested his power in a way that created a new world that had a certain balance to it. And so I think there are ways to avoid the worst in these situations, but he can't predict it. I don't know. Like, I don't know how you can predict it.
And the sort of message I'm getting from you is that has to happen. It's not enough for us to argue and try and articulate. It has to happen in real life. And one version of that will be that we have the tyranny of the other side, as I've already alluded to in this conversation. Those countries that had it, let's say the East European countries, are quite aware of it.
Yeah.
And so they have maybe a better hold on.
That could be an interesting, that could be an interesting thing. But you can see it like the example of this problem that we see, it's in Europe, because the nations that have now said, okay, we've been through both of these, right? We went through the crazy Nazi stuff, then we spent a whole lot of time under this communist madness, and now they're saying we don't want neither of these. We want to have a kind of strong nation, that has freedoms and everything. And what are they called? Right? They're called Nazis. They're called fascists. And so the story it's still playing out. Like it's still there.
The side of that though, and so this might We've been talking about a phenomenon, a sort of group of people, and Kanye is like an easy manifestation, and I've named others in this conversation. But to some extent, this is a very online phenomenon where we're seeing this emerge. When I mean online, those who are messing, who are inverting what happened.
I mean, come on. I mean, yes, the narrative part is online, but the let's say the fruits of it, or that which is happening, is also political parties being banned in Europe.
But that's a different
being
thing.
arrested. That's not a different
thing.
But
the political parties, what that is the tail end of the post-war consensus playing out in this anti-populist move, all this misinformation, censorship, this attack on malinformation, misinformation is an anti-populist because it's coming from those who can only code everything as Nazi or anti-Nazi. Yeah. That's the only way they can see it.
So what I'm saying is that because the internet is in some ways a place where the story is it's a place where the story gets worked out, is online now, because that's where the discourse is. That's also where the memes are, right? That's where the speed of the story is showing itself. So you can kind of see the seeds. You can see in the world that the situation of the post-war consensus is now becoming arrests, right? And it's becoming, it's moving towards violence, right? So now the question is, so a good example is, of course, in Canada, we just had a Liberal Party that was elected.
Congratulations.
Right? Yeah, congratulations. But the weird thing about it is it's the boomers voted for the Liberals and the young people voted Conservative.
Really?
Yeah.
The majority of young?
I don't know if it's the majority.
Is it shifting right?
It's shifting totally in the space of youth. So that means that you can already see an image of the future. And I think that's the same in a lot of these places where there's a kind of populist right, or there's a new right or whatever, that it's the young people.
Because the young people aren't as affected by the post-war narrative.
Well, they have been marginalized by it. They are the ones that in some ways have kind of lost their... Because the
how have they been marginalized?
Well, in the sense that...
Well, I can tell you how they have been marginalized. But this constant narrative of toxic masculinity, you tell men, and for me, that's a sort of a descendant in the ideas space from the dichotomy of fascism and strong men and strength.
You could say the same. Like, let's say if you think about the idea of unlimited immigration, for example, that we saw now happen in Canada, Justin Trudeau brought in so many immigrants into the country that the prices for apartments in Montreal is almost the same as in London or in Paris, which is just ridiculous. So it's like there's just this madness to just bring in outsiders. The boomers aren't affected by that. I mean, they already have their pension plans. They're fine. They've already done it. It's the young people that are going to live with the weirdness and
except that the boomers have children, so the boomers care about what their children are going through.
They're like grandchildren. I don't know if they really care. I don't know. I mean, this is going off subject, but I think the COVID stuff showed us that the boomers don't care, right? That they want the world. They don't
care about the younger generation.
They want the world to be managed according to their desires. And it's not a conscious thing. It's not something they're doing with malicious intent. But, during it was the weirdest thing. Like during the pandemic, and in Quebec, we got it rough, right? We were locked down, 2 Christmases canceled, just locked down all out. Before the trucker protest, they wanted to increase the passport, vaccine passport, to include grocery stores. Like that's how where they were at that point. And in the midst of the pandemic, when everybody was locked down, our premier, who usually posts just political stuff, for some weird reason, posted a joke on his Twitter of an old man walking next to a pool and pushing a child into the water. And I thought, what? What are you doing? It's this is exactly what's happening. We're literally sacrificing a generation of young people, so that the elderly are comfortable. And it's that's a weird thing to do in a society. So I'm not sure the boomers, at least they're kind of unconscious. I don't know if they really see the effects of their actions.
But back to topic though. So you've said a couple of times in this conversation, you don't know how to integrate or recapture some of the imagery and whatever. But it does, what's happening in Canada with the young taking a different path. It's worth also noting that there's one report in the FT that it's not necessarily the young going more right, but that women and progressives are going harder left.
Right,
So they're actually,
sure.
and so it appears like young men are going right or conservative.
Right.
It's not actually the case. And there's studies that show that in South Korea and a couple of European countries as well. But it might be the case that this younger generation are way less affected by the World War II consensus, and so this actually it'll not necessarily be as nasty a play out as we are concerned that it might be.
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the reason why I talk about it is because I want to avoid the worst. I think in some ways, Jordan Peterson in 2016, he was able to play some of that role. Like he actually did that. He basically, all of this was already bubbling in 2016. All this was already under the surface. It was already all there. And Jordan was able to offer men a way out, to say, you don't have to go in this direction. You can be a man, you can be responsible, you can work hard, you can sacrifice yourself. That's what being a true man is. And I think that he gave us a delay. He gave us like a loop that is now bubbling up again. And so I'm very grateful for him. I saw that right away when I saw what was happening. I thought Jordan is actually giving men that are resentful and angry a way to live out life in a positive way that doesn't need to resort to this type of to the stuff that's bubbling up.
Yes, so that's interesting to think of that in within the paradigm that we've been.
But it's
discussing.
It's the same. I think Christianity does that too. I think Christianity, obviously more so even than what Jordan did. I think that Christianity can give people a way into identity that isn't authoritarian. Like it can give you a way into identity that is based on love and self-sacrifice, right, and service for others. That's true identity. And I think that that's really powerful. And so I'll be honest with you, like when people started using the word Christian nationalist in like a negative way, as if this is a horrible, evil thing, I was like, what? Well, what do you want? Like, what is it that's going to, it's just so like, you can't be an ethno-nationalist. You can't be a Christian nationalist. So what are you going to be? Like, what are you going to be?
Let's because I think Christian nationalist, that is taken to be a synonym for theocracy, right? So Christian theocracy, or theocratic state. That's how I understand that.
Yeah.
Which is how do you understand that?
No, but I think there's probably people,
which I do have a problem with.
There's probably people in that world that want something like that. I would say most of the people believe that Christianity can be a way to kind of anchor our world in a manner that would hold us together, right? And that would be
I'm convinced
a
of
true
that.
direction.
But
because I mean, you probably know the story, but like it's weird because in that sense that you're talking about, like I'm the least thing from a Christian nationalist in that sense. It's like I'm more of a Christian than a nationalist anyways. I don't know what I'm what I would be a nationalist about. Like I'm much more of a Christian. And I had certain people that call me like a demon because I was trying to say that Christianity should be the identity. And I was accused of being a Christian nationalist in the worst way, just because I was saying Christianity is the way out. Like this is the way to go. But I don't know, like people in our world were doing that, accusing me of that. And so I don't know what exactly are we supposed to circle around? Like, what are we supposed to celebrate that can unify us? Because if it's not Christianity, then it's what? Then it's tribe, then it's race, then it's what? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think Christianity is the best thing because it founds your identity on someone who gave his life for others. Now that's something that diffuses. It in some ways, I talked about Augustus, who in some ways sacrifices his power in a symbolic way. Well, Christ did that fully, completely, even though he was just celebrated as king of the Jews coming into Jerusalem by the people. In the way we tell the story, like he was willing to die and to give that up. And so that is the image of true identity, I think. And that's why I think that that in some ways Christianity is our only way out of this.
Yes. One way to colour that in is that, and maybe this ties together a little bit of some of the conversation we've been having, but liberalism was initially, out of the Enlightenment, a reaction to Christianity, and it was led by a lot of atheists. But by about the 19th century, it had sort of integrated back into it. So that, particularly in Britain, you have a sort of Christian liberalism, and it seemed to work because if liberalism had rights, gave you rights and freedoms, Christianity gave you responsibilities.
Yeah.
And so then that combination was killer. I mean, in a positive way, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And then with the killing of God, you then have you have the classical liberal types now unmoored by a metaphysic, and you end up going to the libertarian. It's unbelievably selfish, and at the best of times, like that's the best version of it. And so that's where you sort of have that's my problem with losing.
No, I totally agree. I think that one of the issues with liberalism, and you see it, even the people that still kind of advocated for it now, is that it doesn't have an account for unity, right? It's all about, it's based on ideas, right? And it's also based on individual freedom. And so individual freedom do not society make, right? We need reasons to be together. We need reasons for me to consider you my neighbor and not a stranger. Like there has to be something that binds us, and I think that, like you said, Christianity played that role for a while, and then a kind of nationalism played that role also for a while. But that nationalism, the nationalism that was completely unmoored from Christianity, is what led also to the Great Wars, because all of a sudden, all these people.
That's very interesting. So sort of the Westphalian nationalism. That
I think so. I think that's one of the things that led to both. Like there's something about Christianity and empire that is actually more flexible than nation, because empire has a way to have a loose affiliation to center, right? So you have some, it's like you have Rome as the center and you have the emperor, but it's like if you're in Gaul, it's like your connection to the emperor is very, very symbolic, right? It's very ritualized, but it still functions, makes you feel like you're part of something, but it leaves room for a lot of variation and transformation. One of the things that happened in the modern nation state is, of course, a mistaking or a confusion between unity and uniformity, right? So you see all the stories, right? So basically Napoleon eliminates all of the local languages and just imposes French, top-down education system, top-down bureaucracy that completely is ruled by the central thing. And it's already there even in the Enlightenment kings, right? It's like this, everything is just this top-down uniformity. But ancient worlds were just a dance between unity and multiplicity, right? They were a dance between adaptation to the local space and local languages and local dialects. But then, our elites still know Latin, right? But I don't have to know Latin. I can speak whatever Romance language I speak. But as long as the bishop and the priest know Latin, there's some connection to a unity, right? And so I think that is a better way. I don't know how to live that out in the modern world, but what I mean is that you can see that we've radicalized identity, and that's one of the things that led to this fascist communist opposition, is that it's like uniformity or flatness. Right?
Yes. There's another aspect of maybe it's insignificant now, but one thing I have noticed over the last 5-10 years is that terms like Nazism were so overused that no one really believes it anymore. A lot of people no longer, it doesn't have the edge that it did, because
everything's called
Nazi. But I say that as a little, maybe a glimmer of hope that maybe things are moving in a positive way. Obviously, we've covered a lot. Before, I want to have a different kind of conversation with you over on our Substack at winstonmarshall.co.uk and ask you about the interplay of the Christian civilization and Islamic civilization, which could be spicy. In fact, it will be spicy.
Like, can
I
we
promise.
find something even more spicy
Yeah.
than talking about Nazis? Like, let's talk about Islam.
But before we do that, is there anything that we need to tie the bow on in this conversation? Is there any aspects you think we haven't touched on?
No, I would say the only thing that I would say is in some ways a call to caution on all the sides, which is, on the one hand, I know there are people that are tempted by the opposite story. There are people that are tempted to say, we got it all wrong. The Nazis were right. We should have allied with them. The world would be much better now. We wouldn't have all the crazy, identity madness that we had, So there are people that are truly tempted by that. I would say that that's a very dangerous way to go, because it is in some ways a caricature of reality, and it's basically like just taking a story that is run out and then taking it upside down and trying to affirm it. It's like a satanic version of the story. I think that's wrong. But I think also on the other side of people that are freaking out because they're seeing the story shake and they're seeing people trying to deal with this stuff and in some ways trying to find a way to reintegrate some of the story, that there has to be leeway for that to happen too. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I think that there has to be leeway for that to happen. And so the discussion has to kind of continue. And the best way to have the discussion is to do it in a civil, respectful way, and to not immediately see evil intentions in those that are not exactly on our side, and to try to see how is it that we can enter into discussion. It's like also has to happen, and that we can't control. Like there has to be something's going to happen. I don't know what it is, but at least at this point, what we can do is try to see in discussion how we can deal with this question. So anyway, so that's what I would say to end.
Wonderful. Thank you. Before we do go over to talk about spicy Islam-Christian relations, is there anything that you'd like to bring to the attention of the audience? Obviously, there's your YouTube, The Symbolic World. I'm a big fan and I highly recommend.
Well, one of the things, maybe this can help you see what I am trying to do, because I say I don't know what to do, but there are things that I am doing, and is in some ways I think that there are some things, for example, like the way that Disney has dropped our stories, right? The way that a lot of the media now hates our fairy tales, hates our folk stories, hates all of that, because they actually keep projecting back into these stories the fascism. They project back into it the evil. And so one of the things that I'm doing is I'm retelling children's fairy tales, and I'm doing it in a kind of celebratory way, a way to kind of show their beauty and the way to show, how deep they are and and they're really kid stories, but we've done it with like the best illustrators, beautiful heirloom quality books. And to me, it's a way to say, it's like we can complain and we can talk about it, but in some ways the best way to go about would be to find the actually truly beautiful things that are part of our traditions and just put them out there for people to be able to appreciate them again. So
how can
people can go to the symbolicworld.com. You can find obviously all the podcasts that I'm doing, and there's also a store there where you can see the books that we're publishing.
Wonderful. Jonathan Pageau, a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Winston Marshall Show with Jonathan Pageau. Remember, if you want to support this show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, I can have more phenomenal guests like Jonathan exploring the issues you want to hear about that the mainstream media won't touch. And if you head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk, you'll have that extended conversation between me and Jonathan, as well as ad-free viewing. But until next time, be well.